Okay, hi guys, my name is Sigurdson, and I love a good sustainable city. So as you can see from this picture, I'm literally jumping for joy at the sight of this wonderful example of urban core revitalization in downtown Oslo, Norway. So the building that you see in the background here is the Oslo Opera House. It was opened in 2008 and it was designed to mimic, a giant ice floe sliding into a fjord. It represents natural meeting urban Norway. Not only is this building beautiful, but it serves an important purpose within the city of Oslo. It's the home of the ballet, the opera, and other cultural and theater performances. It creates a space for gathering within the urban core, and it brings people back into the city. On the other side of the water from this building is everything that you would expect to see in the downtown of a major European center. So there's hotels, restaurants, bars, cultural and heritage sites, everything like that. But then there's also homes, businesses, services, sort of like real life things. So what they've done here is they've created a multifunctional mixed use space that is human friendly and it's a human scale environment. So why am I telling you all this? Well, today I'd like to start a discussion on sustainable urbanism. And I think that this picture gives us some context in that sense. It shows us what a sustainable city can look like and can do for us. Sustainable urbanism is an incredibly pertinent topic today, as 80% of Canadians now live in cities. Therefore, we must find a way to support our growing urban populations in a way that benefits our citizens, our natural environment, and our economy. So here in Canada, we've set out some very ambitious targets to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. However, greenhouse gas emissions in Canada rise every year. In 2015, Canada was ranked 5th in terms of global per capita carbon emissions, and our city of Saskatoon has one of the highest per capita carbon emissions of any city in the country. This is a big problem, and it's something that we really need to fix if we hope to continue our urbanization of our country in a sustainable manner. So here in Canada, we're looking for a way to accommodate our growing urban population sustainably, and I believe that Scandinavia's 3 largest capitals, Stockholm, Oslo, and Copenhagen, provide relevant examples as to how we can do just this in a way that benefits our citizens, our economy, and our natural environment. Okay, so let's talk about our reduction targets. So the City of Saskatoon has set out some ambitious reduction targets for our greenhouse gas emissions. Our last greenhouse gas inventory took place in 2014 and found that municipal emissions had risen by 12% between 2003 and 2014. Since then, we've set out some very interesting and significant targets to reduce our municipal greenhouse gas emissions. So as you can see, we'd like to reduce them by 40% as soon as 2023. So that's in just 4 years from now. And then 80% below 2014 levels by 2050. So these are really big goals, and I'm really happy that we've made the step towards making these goals. However, goals are just goals until you have a plan to actually move towards them. And so far, the City of Saskatoon doesn't seem to have a clear and comprehensive plan to actually meet these targets. In comparison, Copenhagen has reduced its municipal greenhouse gas emissions by 40% since 1990 and plans to further reduce, it plans to become carbon neutral as soon as 2025. Oslo has reduced its per capita greenhouse gas emissions by 7% since 1990 and plans to further reduce to 95% of 1990 levels by 2030. And Stockholm has already reduced its emissions by 55% since 1990 and also plans to be carbon neutral by 2050. So this is quite incredible and it's quite significant. And I'm sure you're wondering how they do such things. Well, these cities are actually quite similar to Canadian cities. Saskatoon anticipates growth to 500,000 in the next several years, and therefore we're going to require major infrastructure development if we hope to sustainably accommodate our growing population. Therefore, I believe that these cities provide good examples of how we can do just that, as they face similar challenges to us with respect to having cold climates and having quite relatively large countries, so there's lots of distance to traverse. You would think that you would need a private car. But somehow they've done this, and really it hasn't been anything crazy. They've really just made plans, they've implemented plans, they've had the public involved, and they just got on with it, and they've had some amazing results. So let's look at some of the strategies that these plans implement. The first thing we can talk about today is transportation, and we're going to talk about it first because transportation infrastructure is crucially important to all aspects of the sustainable city. We need to go places, but how can we get from place to place in a way that minimizes our negative environmental impacts and perhaps even creates some positive benefits for our own health and well-being. So of course, if we're not stuck in traffic all day, if we're not alone in a car for hours a day, we're probably going to be happier, we'll be more productive at work and school, and our environment will be happier as well. For large and growing cities such as Saskatoon, active and public transportation infrastructure are going to be vital in order to mitigate the negative environmental impacts associated with private car overuse. So these impacts are already evident in Canada on the national, provincial, and at the local levels. Here in Canada, 27% of our total greenhouse gas emissions actually come from the transportation sector. And then Saskatchewan actually has the highest transportation emissions of any province in our country. And then at our local level here in Saskatoon, 80% of our population actually commutes alone in a private car to and from work, to and from school, while only 2% utilize our public transit system and only 3% utilize our current active transit systems. So this is a big problem. However, it actually illustrates a huge opportunity to reduce our local greenhouse gas emissions by simply reducing the number of cars on our roads, as studies suggest that everyone who uses public transit rather than commuting via private car will reduce their travel CO2 emissions by 83%. So how can we do this? Well, in Stockholm and Copenhagen, they've redesigned existing road structures to accommodate cycling lanes to make commuting via cycling easier and safer for its residents. So this has added a huge uptake of cycling to work and school because it makes people feel safer and more comfortable. It's easy and it's a convenient way to get around these cities. They've also added safe bicycle parking to all of their public transit stops to encourage multimodal transportation. And if you love your bike too much, which is totally understandable, to leave it at a public transit stop, you can simply pick it up and take it on any node of public transit with you. They allow that as well. Going along with their public transit infrastructure in Copenhagen, in order to get more cars off the roads, they decided they really needed to improve their public transit infrastructure and make it more user-friendly. So what they did is they've developed a physical and virtual integration across all their nodes of public transit. So they've created a single unified public transit system. One ticket is valid across all nodes. So that's the bus, the train, and the metro. And then users can easily move between nodes to get wherever they want to be within their city. In Oslo, they've taken a slightly different approach by really encouraging the greening of public and private vehicles. So that's using biomass-fueled, electric, and hybrid electric-fueled vehicles in both their public and private transit stock. They've also further incentivized using green vehicles by exempting green vehicle users from the fee which people using conventional private cars are subject to upon entering each city's urban core. They do the same thing in Stockholm. If you're using a conventional private car to go into their city, you have to pay. If you're using active or public transit or a green vehicle, you don't have to pay. So how can we implement some of these strategies here in Saskatoon? Well, we do currently have a bus system in Saskatoon. However, I think anyone who's ever used this bus system can agree that it's not really a reliable or convenient transportation option for the majority of people. Buses arrive infrequently, they often run behind or ahead of schedule, sometimes they don't come at all, especially if it's really cold out. And also not all areas of our city are serviced by bus. So yeah, it's not super convenient. We're gonna need some major improvements to the system if we hope to increase usership of this. Luckily, we do have the BRT, or the Bus Rapid Transit System, piloting this fall, so hopefully that will really increase usership of the system, make it more convenient, and help us out with some of the existing problems. We could also really benefit from creating better, more comprehensive active transportation networks. We already do have some bike lanes in the city. However, this bike lane network is fairly limited. It's confusing. Lots of people don't really know what to do with it, and it's making some people quite upset. So if we could prioritize our investments towards creating better active transportation networks and better public transportation infrastructure, we would definitely see an increase in using these systems. And then if we also sort of shifted away from increasing or bettering private car infrastructure, like existing road structures and stuff like that, people would start moving away from using these systems and move towards our alternative and more eco-friendly options for transportation. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about, the next strategy, is the sustainable neighborhood strategy. So sustainable neighborhoods are really important, as of course they're the building blocks of the sustainable city. The traditional neighborhood design approach, and the one that we're currently using in Saskatoon, is called the growth approach, which means as more people move to our city, we're simply creating more and more new developments, which are often far from the urban core. They're increasingly on the urban fringe. There's lots of problems associated with this. It sort of necessitates private car use because you're so far away from everything you need to get to. They're not really mixed use neighborhoods. It's kind of like you have to sleep in one place, go buy groceries somewhere else. You have to use a car a lot. It's not convenient. And it also disrupts the natural environment surrounding our city. So what would our ideal sustainable neighborhood look like? Well, pretty much the poster child for sustainable neighborhood design in Stockholm is Hammarby Sjöstad, which is a neighborhood that they've developed out of a former brownfield site, which was a former industrial harbor area, and they've made a modern eco neighborhood with a focus on environmental and social sustainability. So that basically means that they've made a neighborhood and they've employed several different sustainability strategies within it. So they use transit-oriented development to ensure that everyone in the neighborhood has access to public and active transportation infrastructure. They use a compact urban design strategy. So they have a high-density neighborhood. It's a mixed-use neighborhood, and everybody is able to get where they need to go, and everything you need is in one convenient location. They use renewable energy within their neighborhood, so they use solar power, and they generate a portion of their energy from their city's own wastewater. And they have mandatory public education initiatives on conservation, so everyone is aware of what they're consuming and how it affects the natural environment in their country, in their neighborhood, and in their city. So expanding on the compact urban design strategy, many Scandinavian cities are starting to utilize this. For example, in Oslo, they've created what's called an urban growth boundary, where they essentially just drew a line around their city and they said, we won't grow past this line. Instead, we'll just develop within what we currently have. We'll make it work. We'll strengthen our existing developments, and we'll integrate the whole thing with convenient public transit links and active transit links, and we'll create a mixed-use space. We'll have a mixture of residential, commercial, and industrial buildings. This has been super successful in Oslo. It's created a more human-scale environment. It's easier for people to navigate. And then, of course, the natural environment surrounding Oslo is protected from urban sprawl. The waterways are protected, the forests are protected, everything like that. So how can we apply this in Saskatoon? Well, as a prairie city, Saskatoon has no physical barrier preventing ongoing lateral growth, which I think is one of our biggest problems. We just have prairie, so we can just expand as far as we want, which is becoming a huge problem. As you can see, this is the Saskatoon North Partnership for Growth strategy, which basically shows us how far we're going to grow to as our population grows. So I don't know if you could see, but the areas in light blue show how far we'll grow to accommodate a population of 700,000, and then the areas in dark blue show how far we'll grow to accommodate a population of 1 million. So if you can see, it actually expands all the way past Oslo, which is really, really ridiculous. Like, there's no way people are going to be able to get around a city that's this physically large. It's not going to be convenient. You're going to need a private car. It's going to ruin the natural prairie surrounding the city. Yeah, it's just really inconvenient. So I'd love to see them redesign this strategy and instead say, hey, we're only going to grow this far, like they've done in Oslo. Here are the places that we can increase density. Here are the places that we can add better mixed-use spaces. And this is what we're going to do to avoid this sort of sprawl and the negative impacts associated with it. The last thing we're going to talk about today, and perhaps the most important component, is public engagement and attitudes. So in order to reduce a city's environmental impact, we need to engage the public. We need to have our public on board with initiatives such as conservation and things like this. In Canada, I think our attitude is one of our biggest problems that's holding us back from achieving sustainability. So we're really lucky to live in a large and resource-rich country here, but it's caused us to sort of subscribe to this myth of superabundance. So we have clean food, we have clean water and good food readily available for us here. We have vast, beautiful spaces of nature. And so our attitude is kind of right now one, not of conservation, but rather one of uninhibited resource use. We haven't realized, I don't think fully, that these resources that we're using are finite, and our actions actually do have an effect on the planet. So how can we fix this? I think probably the most effective thing that we're going to need here is effective education from the ground up and awareness campaigns in order to really fundamentally change our attitudes towards how we view the environment. So it could be something from kindergarten to grade 12, and then also in the workplace. And as people become homeowners, they can learn about how they can better conserve and how they can live in a more sustainable manner. So of course, they've implemented this in Stockholm's Hammarby neighborhood, as we saw earlier. They have a mandatory conservation education initiative in their neighborhood, so everybody knows exactly what they need to be doing in order to conserve resources within their neighborhood. They also encourage and promote the use of this system that everyone has access to, where you can monitor your daily domestic water and energy use to create more conscious consumers within that environment. In Copenhagen, they've kind of done something along these lines as well in terms of public engagement in sustainability initiatives. So they created something called the Copenhagen Wind Cooperative. Basically, one day the city of Copenhagen said, we're probably going to need to switch to renewable energy. Fossil fuels aren't really working for us. Denmark's really windy, so let's make a wind farm. So they started making a wind farm, but then the public got a little concerned, and they said, well, I think this is going to be too noisy to have in our city. I don't know if I like this. So instead of giving up on their project, the city said, okay, well, you can come to the wind farm, you can take a tour of the wind farm, and you can decide if it's too noisy. So everybody who wanted to went to the wind farm. They decided it wasn't too noisy. They were very happy, and then they introduced the cooperative aspect, meaning that anyone in the city who was interested could buy a share of the wind farm, and then they could have their voices heard in the city's new energy initiative, and they got to learn lots about renewable energy, and it was just a really great initiative, in my opinion. So in conclusion, the purpose wasn't to say that like Saskatoon sucks or we're completely doomed or anything. We're definitely not doomed. There's obviously lots of strategies that we could implement to start moving towards sustainability. The targets that the City of Saskatoon has set out, the greenhouse gas reduction targets, really do indicate, in my opinion, a desire to start working towards sustainability. It's just we really need a comprehensive plan and some strategic implementation to actually take the next step and start working towards these goals. And perhaps these strategies may seem a little bit impossible for Saskatoon at this time, but it's really important to remember that these three cities that we just talked about were all once in very similar positions to Saskatoon. So they were heavily reliant on fossil fuels, private cars, they had large footprints. The city and its people simply decided to make a change, a positive change. They decided they needed to make a change. They created plans, they implemented the plans, they engaged the public, and they've had some really incredible results. So I don't see why we can't do this in Saskatoon as well. Thank you, that's it. Let me know if you have questions.